Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us, and welcome once again to your regular Thursday programming of teissTalk. As usual, we have got a great conversation today. We're going to be talking about navigating the rising legal threats to cybersecurity leaders. So that's pretty much, everyone here, really. Before that, a couple of notices. Firstly, don't forget, if you wish to win a teissTalk mug, which I don't have with me today because I'm on the road doing this, but if you wish to win a teissTalk mug, they're very collectible. I know people with 3 or 4 of them. Then all you have to do is click in the bottom of the screen, round about here on the chat, and ask your question. The one that makes us laugh, the one that makes us cry, the one that makes us cringe, or the one that we really have no idea how to answer, or the one that I just pick randomly will be the lucky recipient of a teissTalk mug. So without further ado, let me invite onto the stage our 2 panelists for today's show. Welcome, Michaela and Kelly.
Thank
Hello,
you.
Michaela.
Hello.
And hello, Kelly.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Very great pleasure.
And let's start, shall we? Let's get warmed up a little bit on our news item today. It comes from our friends of the show, Info Security Magazine. Headline reads, CISO liability risks spur policy changes at 93% of organizations. Now, firstly, I'd love to know how they did the maths on this, because 93%, you'd think at least one of us in the room would have been subject to something like this. But also, it seems to have happened really quite quickly. So why is there this sudden change in policies across organizations?
I think you've got a combination of different things going on, right? You've got the things that are in the news, like the Joe Sullivan case in the US, and we can talk about that separately. You've got the SolarWinds case, and we can talk about that separately. But you've also got a lot of change in regulations, right? So you've got things coming out of the US from the SEC, from the NYDFS. You've got NIS2, which I'm sure you've talked about many, many times before. Putting liability on individuals, and a general move legally towards making people responsible for things rather than just the companies, right?
Yeah.
It's a confluence of things.
So is having people responsible for things the right way to go? Because very often these situations are a perfect storm of circumstance. And very often, although whilst it says in the article about people driving more clarity around roles and responsibilities and things like that, I think many of us have been in situations where our role is accountable for something, but has zero responsibility to drive change and to drive any kind of improvement in areas. So you may end up with the wrong person under the bus.
I completely agree. I think I agree with what Kelly said. I think people are scared, and that's why there's been all this change in policy and why people are trying to do something else. With NIS2 making people personally liable, people are worried, and it does, I agree, make people think that maybe they are going to be thrown under the bus. I think NIS2 is there, and the provisions around personal liability, to foster a more meaningful change in security position rather than just another policy or another place. So I think there is things that maybe might be happening in particular around people taking liability insurance and other things. But I think the purpose is around that fostering liability. And I think there needs, like you said, around clarity of roles. I think that same article had 46% of people, which is quite shocking as a lawyer, 46% of people not knowing what they are actually responsible for when a cyber incident happens, which I've seen it firsthand. People are at the worst day of their life, and it's quite stressful anyway. They're forgetting things. So if you don't know it before and then it gets to the point of that incident, that is scary. And I think that's the point of these provisions and changes, not just to scaremonger, but actually to create that resilience within organizations.
I think also we've seen this before, right, Tom? There's nothing new under the sun. you look at what happened in the financial crisis, and everybody said, "Oh my goodness me, not one single person has gone under the bus for this, or gone to prison, or been dragged through the courts." I mean, it's not quite true. People did take the rap for it, but then you get the FCA moving towards a senior managers regime and a much more clearer articulation of roles within the senior leadership of financial institutions.
Yeah.
There's history for this, and I think cybersecurity is still legally quite a new, exciting, different topic.
I mean,
And
I
so,
am the young face of cybersecurity.
oh, well, I can see that. I
Yeah.
can see that. But do you know what I mean? Like, I think this is just the way the world is going. And I don't have a very strong view about whether it's the right way to go or the wrong way to go. Personally, I kind of think it actually will end up coming out in the wash and not being that dramatic.
Yeah.
But and there will be consequences for people when they get stuff wrong, but it's probably more like losing their job than being thrown under the bus by the authorities.
And I think also, sorry, Tom, I was just going to say, I think also, like Kelly was saying, you know, it is if you do something wrong, we're seeing all these cases in America, but most of them, you know, around fraud of stealing personal information or, you know, not disclosing cyber risks. So it's not your day-to-day CISO doing something wrong. It's something that hopefully the people that are watching today aren't really going to encounter in their day-to-day job.
I think we mentioned this yesterday, and I'll reduce the colourful language. You know that actually, if you don't do any kind of dodgy illegal stuff, you're probably going to be all right. You know, and
I would think so. Like from a criminal perspective, you know, if you look at the cases in the US, the SolarWinds one's a bit different. But you know, the Joe Sullivan one, what he was accused of had really nothing to do with his job. It was covering up something that had happened. And but I do think one thing you do have to be careful of, in terms of kind of giving people comfort, is that all the regulators have hindsight bias. So they're looking at the job you're doing today, like 4 or 5 years down the line, and standards move and things move. And as one of my clients used to say to me, Harry hindsight is 2020. And so what you think you're doing today is a good job, 5 years time might not look like a good job, and it might even be borderline negligence. So I think what that speaks to is policies, procedures, documentation, risk registers, all that good stuff that I'm sure people are doing anyway, to make sure that when the hindsight bias comes in, you've got really good accountable documents for that.
Definitely documenting that risk is so important. Like you said, if especially people today, if they're not quite fully 100% happy in what they're doing at the moment, then in those 5 years' time, there definitely needs to be that documentation now of what's happening and making sure that those blinkers are coming off and people understand that they're doing the right thing now as the bare minimum, because hindsight is a great thing.
So I think if you've got and we say this time after time, if you've got the cyber hygiene basics in place, if you're doing, you know, your level best and you have got documentation and a security program in place, etc., may not be the best. You may not have all the money you need to put everything you need into it, but if in that moment, in that environment, you're actually attempting to raise the bar, the authorities will take a far happened and what's going on than just you're being sent down for being negligent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, some people get this idea that all the authorities are completely living in a different world, and sometimes they probably are. But, you know, I think in most cases they're sensible people, and they're not looking to penalize people for things that they're very, you know, they're doing their best.
Yeah.
And I think there's a distinction between avoidable and unavoidable. Like if you've done everything you can, and, you know, these notifications to the ICO and everything else, if you're setting out everything you have done, and, you know, that's quite extensive, that is, you know, at some sense unavoidable. It's not if, but when you get a cyber breach. So you just have to do your best. And that's kind of the position that I think these regulators in a good world do take.
And I, as a twice recovering CISO now, I can tell you that every time I see a major, you know, front page breach in the same industry or market or space that I'm in, I, along with every other CISO in that space, breathe a sigh of relief that it wasn't us, because actually, we think we're doing the very best we can, and we're doing a good job. But actually, it's sometimes the stars align in such a way that it's going to happen.
Right. And if you're a CISO of a major retailer in the UK right now, I'm not sure if I'd be breathing a sigh of relief or running around like a headless chicken trying to make sure that I had got everything buttoned down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we've got Harrods, M&S, and Co-op. I think Co-op are probably just trying to cast themselves in the same place as M&S and Harrods. Maybe, I don't know. It's a marketing ploy, maybe. But this isn't just any kind of breach. This is a Co-op. But I think I think you're absolutely right. Working with other retailers, they're all just looking over their shoulders very much on a hourly, daily, every minute of the day, just waiting for the shoe to drop, because it's clear that that particular segment of the industry is being targeted.
Yeah, specifically, even the threat actor kind of put out there that there will be more retailers to come, so it's not like they're even kind of distinct from that. And I think you were saying around getting all of your ducks in line and making sure that all your technical parts are in place, but actually it seemed from what we've seen in the press that this was actually just a bit of social engineering, a couple of calls to a fake IT center. So even if you've got everything in place, like you said, sometimes these things do just happen, and you can train your staff to the moon and back, but sometimes these things will happen and you just have to be resilient. You have to be ready.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And make sure that bad news travels fast. I think that's part of the issue, right? When you see people being hung out to dry, a lot of it comes down to whether they have communicated appropriately internally. And obviously, like in the middle of an incident, communication is so difficult because you might be communicating off channel for a start, but you just almost want to over communicate. I mean, why would you not cover your own bottom? It's a good motto for life, and I feel like it's a good motto like cover your backside. If you've told everyone what you're up to and what you're doing, like, then you can't be in it on your own, can you?
And I think M&S have been, lauded for their almost masterclass in communications over the time.
They've been great.
They've been absolutely fantastic, and I think when you actually are open, honest, and transparent with your customer base, they're very forgiving.
Agreed. I do. I wouldn't be surprised if their claims were not as high as you would see with others, because that communication has been there from the offset, and the data subjects would have been trying to protect themselves from the beginning, rather than not even know that it's happened for 6, 7, 8 months, whatever may be the case with some other breaches. I think also M&S are kind of your benchmark for what British society looks to. M&S is that kind of fundamental standstone, so you need to make sure that, I think it was on their shoulder that they did it right, and they've done it amazingly.
Yeah, that's right. And I was at a dinner last night with some peers and colleagues, and we were talking about the changes in regulation about reporting, because of course we know and we find out there's been a number of high-profile cases of companies not reporting something until it's actually exposed a year later and things like that.
Yeah.
And regulations like NIS2 are now actually more stringent than GDPR, saying you have to report within 24 hours of confirmed breach and regularly thereafter. Person I sat next to highlighted that Moldova, of all places, their guidance or their requirement is 6 hours from the moment of confirmed breach. And
same in India, right?
Yeah, and she felt actually that was a good thing, because you don't have a chance to craft some mealy-mouthed word salad kind of response. You've just got to say what's happened. You don't have an opportunity to get everybody in the room to get comms to approve something and say, well, should we say that? Should we not? You just have to tell them, which is an interesting take on the subject, I think.
I think that's a really interesting take. I don't know. I'm not sure if I entirely agree with that, because I do think you do have to...
There was a comment about the lawyers not agreeing with it.
right? I mean, clearly. But I do think, people pay people like Michaela and me to assess legal risk. And,
Yeah,
clearly reporting an incident to an authority brings with it risk. Risk of enforcement, risk of further questions, risk of what might be perceived as interference. And you do need to make sure that you are appropriately managing that risk. But equally, I do agree that if you don't have any information, there's very little you can, in fact, actually say.
yeah,
It's sometimes a bit harder coming up to the 72-hour window because we actually do probably know quite a lot at that point. And
yeah.
you don't really want to say it because it's not very nice. And
No,
it's a bit icky.
exactly.
It's a bit icky. But
I
I'd
completely
be,
agree.
yeah, I'd be interested to know like how they're gonna enforce that and
Yeah,
how stringent they're going to be, because obviously you've got the obligation in India to report within 6 hours.
yeah.
No one, in my experience, no one ever does that. I mean, 24 maybe.
Actually,
um
wasn't the India one? It was also any kind of malicious network activity, which would have been also included like pinging an IP address. You know,
India's really, it's a really wide
any kind of port
obligation.
scan, which means
Yeah,
you could be reporting millions of
yeah,
events.
yeah, and they've got really much more active actually,
Mm,
in responding to reports. So you could be just sucked into a constant back and forth. And I mean, the ICO's always been fairly laid back about the 72 hours.
yeah.
It's only like, I think it's the most recent fine for the Article 32 breaches that they've actually flagged that it was a late report.
Mhm.
I've not seen them flag it before, so I don't know. I don't know how much of this is kind of scaremongering by the
Mm.
I think there's a
regulators.
balance to be had definitely between what you're saying, but also without putting yourself in that position. Because sometimes what may seem like it is the case at the beginning is not 8 hours later, but you've already then disclosed that 6 hours and you've put yourself in a position which you can't come back from, which then looks negligent on your part
Yeah.
by all of your best efforts and digital forensics.
Yeah, exactly. Let's swing back to the panel proper here. And we're talking about, the personal risks
Mm.
that security leaders are facing. Although I will link back to that article. It said there was stats in there. I'm not looking at the article now, but there were stats in there about who was considered to blame, for instance. And CISOs were at the bottom of the list. I always thought CISO stood for career is so over anyway, or information scapegoat officer or something. So I was surprised to see that they're quite so low. So there does seem to be I'm going to say mismatch here between, CISOs are not as open to being blamed for an incident on the one hand, but on the other hand, here we are talking about should they be taking out personal liability insurance?
I find that, well, I mean, obviously it's just my experience, right,
Yeah.
of incidents I've handled for clients. Where there's been a problem, it's because of the way the incident's responded to, rather than the way that the incident occurred in the first place.
Yeah.
It's really rare that, particularly for the sorts of clients that I'm working with, to find that there's a really big glaring hole in the
Yeah.
security. It'll be a 0 day, or it'll be a slightly wrongly configured firewall, or it'll be someone clicking on a link, and then once the TA is in, he or she is in, right?
Yeah.
But it's whether the response is the nice ordered, which we're all aiming for, we never achieve, the nice ordered, careful, thoughtful
Yeah.
response, or if it's the headless chicken. And the easiest scapegoat in those instances is the CISO, in my
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
I think maybe, Tom, like you were saying, that article puts CISO at the bottom. Maybe it's just because people have felt that they were a scapegoat in the past, and now they've started to put in that documentation and those clear communication that we were kind of educating on earlier. Maybe that's the issue, and the reason why CISOs, rightly so, should not be the scapegoat for these issues. I think liability insurance, it seems like the quick win. I don't necessarily think it's the only win. Maybe we should be fostering that better security at the offset and then using that liability insurance as a security blanket rather than the only reason as a loophole around getting to that point. Although, like Kelly was saying, we don't really see that. It's more the way that the incident is dealt with, or lack of reporting or other points that becomes the issue, rather than what one person did or did not raised to the board as something that needed to happen, MFA, etc.
Yeah, and I think the challenge as well is with CISOs, and I've said this on this show many times before. The first thing a CISO should be doing is not checking his perimeter or checking his or her perimeter or checking, whether they've got MFA installed. They should be checking their incident response plan anyway, because at 9:02 in the morning, when an incident could kick off on their very first day, they need to know what to do. They need to know how to manage it, and that includes communications and legal and regulatory requirements. Across,
and making sure that that's actually tested as well. Like, so many people just have a plan, leave it on the shelf, and then 6 years later, when something does happen, they've got no clue how to communicate off channel, they've got no clue what's going on, who's actually responsible, like we were saying about clear rules. So yeah, tabletop exercises, making sure that who is the person that you actually need to be emailing, not just some random inbox that's never monitored, or a phone line that you don't have the number for when your laptop closes. So making sure that you have that plan actually in place is so important to be resilient in these issues and stop those personal liabilities further down the line.
Yeah, and with one of the things I was thinking about when we were discussing the topic yesterday, is like, the CISO is the head of a structure in most organizations. If you've got good management, if you've got good lines of communication within the InfoSec team, if you've got clear designated responsibilities within that team, the CISO should just be the top of the pyramid where everything's filtering up to. So no, he or she should not be going and checking how are the firewalls configured. Somebody else's job is to configure the firewall. And all of this is about organizational structures and making sure that it's set up right. So once you've checked your IRP, then check your organizational structures and your reporting lines, and making sure that everybody's in the right place, because one person can't be in charge of all of this. They are notionally, but they can't be.
Yes, yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and one I'm going to add to that, to my story of the instant one, and claim it as my own. So thank you for that.
Good.
What I was going to say, and I want to pick up on what you said, Michaela, about testing. The thing that always strikes me is that people say, "Oh, we can't test the plan because it's disruptive. We can't get hold of people, etc." But that seems to me perhaps only in the case of the most severe kind of incident. Surely your incident response plan should include everything from potentially the lowest criteria of incident and graded upwards to the higher. And any kind of decent sized organization, anyone over 1,000 odd people, there's going to be an incident fairly regularly of some description, be it a lost laptop, be it somebody sending out a distribution list to an unknown third party. That same process can still be tested, obviously with some different people, but the calling tree, or whatever you like to call it, the gathering of people into the war room, or whatever you like to call it, will be tested. Your process, your underlying process, is still being tested, and it's being tested in real life as well, and that is a valid test of your system. It doesn't have, you can use real incidents and say we've tested our plan.
Exactly, and conversely to that, the cyber Armageddon, everything goes down, everything's off. You don't actually have to do that to test your incident response plan. You can do a tabletop exercise. You can even just simulate that internally. It doesn't have to be everyone go offline for the day. We're going to practice as if we're offline for the day. You don't need to do that. You can do it in a controlled environment, and like you said, either use those small case scenarios, but the fact that they're never ever practiced at all is what the problem is, rather than that it's going to interrupt your day.
And break it up into bits. We do all kinds of different tabletops with people that will be just the legal team, or just the board, or just for communications people. And you don't have to do all of this all together in one go and take the entire C-suite offline in a room with your lawyers, your retained forensics people, and your retained comms team for 24 hours to simulate it. You can do it bits, you can break it up, but the important thing is that you've tried to test it as best you can, and you've done a proper learnings from those exercises, not just gone, oh, it didn't really work, but you've actually taken the learnings away and improved the plan or improved the process. Test them when like the key man is on a plane. We do that quite a lot. We put the GC on a plane, or put the CISO on a plane. What do you do then? And those they're fun. I actually think they're really fun to do, because it's never fun in the moment, but
no. So at least have fun over the mistakes you make now.
Right.
And it takes away those sleepless nights of thinking, oh, what happens if we do go down whilst the CISO's on a plane? Like, what will happen. It takes away that unpredictability, which is where issues come up in an instant response.
So let's roll back to, I guess, kind of where this all started. Well, maybe, or at least the focal point from the media's perspective, with the Joe Sullivan case. And the judge in the case actually said, ordinarily I'd be sending you down, but this is a warning shot for all CISOs out there, effectively. So, and I think, we rather blithely said, don't do illegal stuff and you won't go down. But it seems like, was this an instance of him proactively, and I'm not sure what we can talk about here or whatever, but is this proactively doing something illegal in order to cover up something? Or was it just someone has to be responsible and therefore it has to be him?
Well, I think this one, I mean, like, I only know what's in the public domain. I'm not involved in the case, and I should say that before I start. But if you read what's in the public domain, the company was already subjected to an FTC order in respect of other problems that they had relating to data. And one of those specific obligations was to tell the FTC if they had another incident. And so there was another incident. They thought about it. It looks like they decided that what they would do is say that was a bug bounty hacker, not an actual hack, and it was all part of the bug bounty program, and so we'll pay them off. And then, as I understand the legal arguments they made, the offence of non-disclosure of an offence under the Computer Misuse Act hadn't occurred because the NDA that the company signed with the hackers effectively meant that they were authorized to get into the system, and therefore it wasn't an offence that the hackers committed in the first place, and so it never needed to be reported to the FTC. And that's where it all fell apart, as I understand the media reporting in the criminal courts, because the judge said, but of course it was an unauthorized hack, and you can't, after the event, turn around and legitimize it. And so I do think that there clearly were like security issues, and whether or not the CISO was responsible for those, I don't know. I wouldn't have presumed to have a clue. But the issue was the culture in the organization was such that let's just cover that up and not tell the FTC. I think you would struggle now to find any company that would consider that was an appropriate course of action. That to me seems of its time.
Maybe it is a warning shot, but it's a warning shot for situations like that, rather than day-to-day, everyday CISO that's trying to do their best, maybe with a limited budget or everything else, which means everything can't be perfect, but they're still trying their best. And hopefully nobody here watching is in that same boat as in the US.
But the thing that always occurred to me throughout this, again, reading whatever's in the public domain, was surely it wasn't his decision. He might have been responsible or accountable for making the report to the FTC in that particular circumstance, and I don't know, but surely the decision to not do it was at a much higher level.
Well, that's certainly when you read the reports, there's that suggestion, but I don't think anybody's ever tested that forensically or, looked at the evidence. So, but I think it does speak to cultural issues. And I think, I've worked for, organizations before where sometimes you think we need to change the culture a little bit here.
Sailing a bit close to the wind, as it were.
Yeah, or just, like, I think if you operate in an environment where blame is ascribed constantly,
Yeah.
then that drives those sorts of behaviors. And I'm not suggesting that is what happened in this case. I don't know. But organizations where somebody's always pointing the finger, it was your fault, that drives culture to put the lid on it, whether that's bribery, fraud, corruption, cybersecurity incidents. It's all kind of come to the same thing. You have to change the culture in the organization. That comes from the top, and it's hard work to do that. But that, without knowing all the specifics of the particular case we're discussing, perhaps there was a cultural issue.
And I think if this is a warning shot to CISOs, it is to say you need to be in the room when those decisions are being made. And if those decisions are being made and you don't agree with them, then this is going to potentially fall on your head. So if you're not in the room, get in the room. If you are in the room and you don't agree, then
stick your head up.
Exactly. And if you are in the room and you do agree, then maybe you are somebody who should potentially be receiving these type of infractions.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like, it's almost like the industry had its 18th birthday around about that time and suddenly realized it was an adult and it had to actually hold itself a little bit more responsible than it had been in the past. We've sort of driven or sort of grown up to the point where we stopped saying no to everything, and now we're sort of more saying yes to stuff. But we're saying yes and then realizing that, oh, actually, this could hurt if we're not careful. And then it started to hurt, and we tried to avoid it. So it's quite I mean, it was definitely a watershed moment, I think, for the industry as a whole.
And I think one of the things that I always sort of reflected on when the case first came out is that a lot of the reporting around it was really very poor.
Yeah.
No disrespect to journalists, but a lot of the reporting around it was really very, very poor, and it spun up a lot of really bad feeling in the industry, and it spun up a lot of really bad press because it was all focused on him taking the rap for the incident, and it's like that's not actually what happened.
Not what it was. Yeah.
And so you're putting the fear of God into people who are trying to do a good job.
Yeah, that's FUD
for no real reason.
Yeah, that's right. I want to touch briefly on, before we go into the subject of sort of shared accountability within organizations, which I think is almost where you were going on that. But I want to touch briefly on the other case you mentioned, SolarWinds, which was, well, global in nature. And, even just the name ascribed to it makes me think of a massive global incident rather than the name of a product. I mean, it's like it's
the brand recognition's gone a bit AWOL there.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. It's mutated beyond all recognition. So in that, sorry, go on.
No, I wasn't saying.
Oh, sorry. So in that instance, how would we ascribe blame in that instance?
So that one was SEC, right? So that was disclosures made to the market about the cybersecurity posture of the company. And the allegation was that the disclosures that were made to market were materially misleading in the sense that they were over projecting their security arrangements, in fact, knowing that they were not true. Now I don't know I don't know much about the case other than what's publicly available in the media, but the SEC has always been quite a aggressive regulator and has taken some really interesting legal stances and pushed the envelope a bit on what they can do and what they should be doing. And in this case, most of the charges were dismissed against the company and thrown out completely against the CISO. So without knowing all the whys and wherefores, I think it was a little bit of an overreach on the regulator's part, one which we probably won't see repeated at least for the next 4 years, because of what's happening, without getting political. I know it's a pub chat, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
With that, for the next 4 years, I think that those sort of more interesting cases, the more novel theories of law. Well, no, I think there'll be fewer of them, because I think
really?
they're going to row back on the enforcement. You can't enforce things if you've had your budget slashed by 50%. And the stated objective is to make the American economy great again and make American companies great again. You're not going to keep slapping them with loads and loads of lawsuits and loads of fines and penalties. So I think you'll see less of that sort of thing in the
True,
US.
but then you also find yourself in a situation where companies are having their security clearances revoked purely because they employed someone.
Yes.
So,
yes, that's very true. But I feel, the FTC's had a lot of its powers rolled back. The DOJ is on a pause for FCPA enforcement.
Very true.
The SEC's had significant change amongst the commissioners. I would be surprised. I've been wrong before. But I would be surprised if we see novel theories of law being advanced and edge cases put forward.
Yeah.
Which probably does the CISO some favors at this juncture.
I agree, but I think again this one was just all around, just the transparency and the openness and the honesty. And if you're in the room and something's being done and it's not right, put your head up. And I think that is the same message throughout, and it is just around that transparency.
Yeah. So the closing point, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. So the closing point here is, creating a workplace ethos of shared accountability. I think we've sort of come to the conclusion, in reality, is if you don't do something illegal, if you don't do something shady, if you're doing your core job actually to the best of your ability and with the best intentions and with the little that you have or the little that you think you have, etc., chances are any kind of legal response towards you is going to be fairly nuanced, but insurance is a nice security blanket in these uncertain times. This whole thing of shared accountability, though, is pushing in the other direction of taking that pressure off the individual, the CISO. So how should organizations even approach anything like a shared accountability model when the regulators, the legal authorities' response is more about, we need individuals to be accountable to this?
I think the way I would approach it is to accept that the way the world is moving is that one person has to be responsible for these things. But you need to build your structure beneath and you need to build your structure above. Cover your bum and make sure that you've got good people underneath you reporting up to you, so you know what's happening in the organization, and make sure that you as the CISO are reporting up to management, executive committee, board, whoever is your ultimate go-to in those circumstances. So they've got transparency, and even if you then have to carry the can personally, you can say to the regulators, the courts, whoever, but I did tell them.
Yeah. So cover your bum, wear a sun hat.
Yes.
And I think you can't also share accountability if people don't really understand, like as a CISO, you having sleepless nights around this data breach and what it means to the company. But then you've got X, Y, and Z sat at their desk doing their job, and if I accidentally send this, it's not the end of the world. Well, actually, for a CISO, that is the end of the world. That training and that awareness and that capability to show everyone that, if you do this, because ultimately they're likely to be the person that does something wrong. This is what it means for the business, not reputationally, financially, but also personally for these people that you work with day to day. So I think training is really, really key and important for shared accountability. Otherwise, it's just a word that you put on another policy. You're not actually sharing any of it at all.
And shared accountability is another sort of great phrase for a security culture, right? A culture of that, to your point earlier, Kelly, which is not finger pointing, is not accusational or, you know, hostile. It's about actually we are in this together. If I see you doing something that is insecure or the wrong thing to do, I will let you know. I will help you do something better. I mean, my first thought here is things like tailgating into an office, for instance. It's a small thing, but I think they found wasn't it oil companies or energy companies that they instigated similar health and safety practices in their offices as they had on oil rigs. So if you go upstairs, you have to have one hand on the handrail, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, they found that, you know, on an oil rig makes complete sense. It feels a bit overkill, but actually having that kind of culture of clear boundaries and clear safety in this instance, lots of, you know, the entire culture of the organization changed to be a far more positive one around it.
Yeah. The person, sometimes, sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
No, go.
I was just going to say, like I said, like the person who's at the front door who's letting someone in is ultimately, you know, that metaphorical front door in your cyber system.
Yeah.
It's actually the person that needs to understand the risk, not the CISO who's, you know, 6 floors up and has, by the time they get to the CISO, the damage is irreversible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to overkill it a little bit, right?
Agreed.
You know, bearing in mind most people push their luck a little bit, maybe cut a few corners because that's human nature. If you have to say to people, always hold the handrail when you go up the stairs, if they do it 90% of the time, that's going to reduce potentially 90% of the incidents, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's stuff there to be done also by the companies, because if you're, you know, telling people make sure you change your password and then you just let them put whatever they want into the password box, if you're kind of putting some guardrails there and some enforcement, that actually helps to reduce that risk again by, you know, a little bit more. So there's stuff that everyone can be doing, and I agree, overplaying a little bit is actually, you know, helps to reduce that risk.
So we come to the end here. I'm going to ask you the standard question that we asked. We're running, oh my goodness, we've only got 3 minutes left. So you can have 10 seconds each. I'm going to be generous. So the question is, you know, what should our audience do when they get to their desks in the morning? What piece of practical advice? And Michaela, let me start with you.
I think just be clear about who those roles and responsibilities are for certain things, especially in your cyber breach and incident response, making sure that that's clear, documented and communicated.
Brilliant. And Kelly?
I would recommend that you evaluate who's below you and who's above you, and find your good people and enlist them to support you in the changing world in which you are going to be facing potentially personal liability.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Great advice from both of you. So I'm going to end on a slight down note here, because audience, it's not that I'm angry. It's just that I'm slightly disappointed that we didn't have a single question. I mean, I know we didn't let you get a word in edgeways, to be fair. So I'm going to award my mug to our 2 panelists, to be fair.
Oh, thank you.
I think that's definitely the right way to go. And also, as we've only got 1 episode this May, I think we can afford both mugs. So, so audience, please do your best next time, or rather do better, as they say. All that's left of me to say is our next episode is on the 5th of June. You got a few weeks off, where we're going to be talking about mitigating human cyber risks with data and behavioral sciences. It sounds like I've got a little bit of reading to do between now and then.
Wow.
So once again, thank you so much, Michaela. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Kelly.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
And to our audience out there, stay secure, my friends.